Yeah, I turned it down to
You
72,
guys
but
like,
it's still a little warm.
You can like scoot in a little more. Like you can like sit in over there.
Yeah.
Just as people like start to come in, we can like fill these seats first.
Yeah, sure. That's good.
Thanks, man.
So how's everybody's week going? Pretty good? I'm Casey, by the way. I haven't met you. Mike, nice to meet you. Oh, yeah. Hi. Come on in.
When they said it was gonna be a cramped venue.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah, I know. But welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then before we leave. So
I just might do that.
go ahead.
My blood does not circulate properly without coffee.
Yeah, they're great. Just a fair warning, when you walk in, the delicious smells are gonna assault you, so be prepared for that.
I am convinced that if the Gospel of John was written today,
Mm-hmm.
and Jesus attending the wedding of Cana in
Mhm.
Fayetteville,
Mm-hmm.
he would be turning water into coffee
Oh, really?
rather than wine.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well,
Fayetteville
dude,
just called
then. Yeah.
I see some smiles.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
So is it okay if I put you in contact with Blair?
Of course.
That'd be
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I know you'll be able to explain a lot better than I will.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. So, an important first step is going to be to get an estimate for the work.
The rehab. Okay.
Yeah.
Which I might actually,
From a
they might usually walk a lot of them, so I'm sure if Dan's already seen it,
Mm-hmm.
they've walked it and they'll give us that estimate. But
Yeah.
is that something that's required when you actually?
Well, I mean, you'll need to at least have an idea because the loan officer is going to have to know how much to tag on to what the prospective sales price would be when qualifying. you.
Okay. Do you
So-
guys ever send anyone of your own out?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
You know, it's just a licensed contractor, so whomever your contact person would be to
That
be able
we-
to, a general
okay.
contractor generally, because a lot of times
Sweet.
there's different,
Yeah.
they're organizing the different subcontractors and pulling together the
all
quote.
that. Yeah.
But they're desired improvements for the house, so
Okay, okay.
repairs, cosmetic, anything, whatever it is that they wanna rehab. And
Fantastic.
that, yeah, so that's something your client could be working on, I'll mention it to them, but then that would go to the contractor so they could prepare an estimate.
Get all that. Okay, I'm gonna send him now because he wanted to go and view it and file an offer
Yeah.
this evening. So before I schedule all that,
Yeah, and I'll see, we might have somebody, I'll check to see if we have an outlet for that
okay, that'd be awesome.
program.
I'll try to get his details. I know he works in a place where he can't always be on his phone, but at lunchtime he usually finds me or texts me during lunch. I just changed it.
I just changed mine too.
Hey, Casey.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you're ready, we can.
Yep, go and get started?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Am I in the,
Alright.
Am I in the
Alright, so, do you want me to turn this on for everybody, or just leave it as is? Okay, great. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, thank you guys for coming in. So we're gonna do and I figured we could start with the ones that are utilized the most in our market. So that would be our government loans, and then in another class, we could focus on, conventional products and contract efficiency and some other topics. But today we're gonna talk about VA, FHA, USDA, so the government loans, and also credit health and how to build up your credit. Hi. All right, so first off, I want to see what you guys happen to know about the history of mortgages. So, does anybody know what the first type of mortgage that was available, what that was? For a long time, there was only one mortgage product. Anybody have an idea what that might have been? What it might have looked like? It was conventional. Any idea on the down payment? Go girl!
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So originally there was only one type of mortgage product available. It was a conventional 20% down, right? So that really kept a lot of people out of the market. So the government decided, hey, you know, we should open up this opportunity for more people. It would be great for the economy. And so that's when you had, you know, government insured loan products become available. So FHA, for example, being one that was designed for people who didn't have as much money to put down, that didn't have perfect credit necessarily, but it still had favorable terms for those buyers because the government was insuring it. It wasn't a private company insuring it for the lender, right? So if I'm the lender and I'm trying to protect myself against the risk that I'm going to give all this money forward and then you're not going to pay back everything that was loaned to you plus the interest, right? So that's where mortgage insurance comes into play. So the role of the government, and depending on which loan type, is going to depend on which entity is insuring it, right? So VA insures VA loans, HUD insures FHA loans, the Department of Agriculture insures USDA loans. So their role is to provide that insurance at a that if that person defaults, that government entity is the one who pays the lender back for their loss. And then that's why you have a VA foreclosure, because then VA gets the property and sells it to try to make up. It's also why you have certain fees, like the upfront funding fee for VA. That's one way that they kind of help replace the costs that they sometimes lose when they're paying back on loans that defaulted. So just a little history there for you. All right, so one of the things I wanted to talk about that some of us have briefly talked on before, loan type, when do you have to have a septic or a well test or a pest inspection? You know, what are the parameters for that? And that's helpful for you if you're representing a seller or if you're representing a buyer. You know, you don't want to take anything for granted, like, oh, this is on a septic, and so automatically there's going to have to be a septic inspection. Not the case. So, all right, so for conventional loans, for whether it's existing property or if it's new construction, they're only required if you guys put it in the sales contract. So if it's noted in the sales contract, hey, seller's gonna provide a septic inspection and pump out the septic tank, in that case, then that makes it a requirement. But it's not a loan requirement. So if it's not in there, you know, it's not happening unless the buyer decides they just wanna get it done on their own, right? The type of well test that would be required, so that's interesting to note that a well test is not required on a conventional loan product, because on your government loan products, the well test is required, always. But for conventional, good morning, that you would need, there's a difference in cost, and there's a difference in the amount of time that it takes to get those back, which is also good to know so that you don't get surprised and find out, oh my God, this well test that I need that I didn't realize that I hadn't gotten yet is going to take 2 weeks to get back, you know. So we'll go over which types go with each program. So for conventional, it's called Total Coliform, COLIFORM, Total Coliform. So that is, I think it's not going to be the more expensive of the tests. It should be a little quicker to get back. Okay, so that's what we call the total coliform test. That's what it's checking for, like E. coli. All right, so for VA loans, VA, I'm sure you guys know, that's the only one that requires one type of inspection. Which one is it?
Termite.
Right, pest inspection is required for VA. Well inspections are also always required with VA loans. So if that property's on a well, you're going to be getting it checked out. Okay, septic inspection only if the sales contract requires it. So if their home is on septic, unless you put it in the contract, there's not going to be any question from us on the septic. If it is in the contract, the lender's going to want to see it because it was noted on, say, the additional provisions addendum, for example. So then we want to see, hey, how did that septic inspection go?
This is for,
VA loans. So pest inspection, well inspection on existing properties, always required. Septic only if it's in the sales contract. Appraiser, something wrong with the septic tank, I suggest that you get it checked out. That would also prompt needing to get a septic inspection as well.
What do you mean by, sorry, on existing properties?
Versus new construction.
Oh, okay.
Yes, so new construction is different because there are certain items that are provided up front that would be in exchange for example, you get a soil test
Oh, yeah.
instead of getting a pest inspection, unless the property has been available or completed for 12 months
Okay.
or more, then you would have to go ahead and get another pest inspection because it's been there long enough.
Okay.
Mhm. So for new construction, soil treatment, well inspections are required, and those are provided with new construction documents, right? So we're typically getting in touch with the builder and the closing attorney because the builder will send those documents over to the closing attorney. So we can either get them directly from the builder or it goes through the closing attorney and then we get them through them. But it's a standard group of documents that we get. The builders are aware of what they need to provide. And so I think it's also part of like the CO process. The CO is one of the things that we get, the certificate of occupancy. So soil treatment and well inspections would be something that we get with those new construction docs. And again, septic inspection only required if it's in the sales contract or if the appraiser requires it for new construction on VA. So for FHA loans, if the property so the septic, termite, and well inspections for FHA are, again, only required if it's in the sales contract. So the loan program is not going to require it in itself, okay? FHA well tests are expensive: lead, nitrate, nitrite, and total coliform. So instead of just the E. coli, you've got lead, you've got those other aspects that are being checked for as well. They take a little longer, they're more expensive, okay? Also, another thing that we have to document, if the property's on well and on septic, we have to get documentation that those are an acceptable distance apart from one another. So that's something that's gonna come up. The appraiser can note that, or we have to get a licensed inspector. If the appraiser for any reason says, I don't have access to that information, can't provide it, then we would have to get an inspector out there to let us know that it meets FHA guides as far as how far apart those two are from one another. If the property's been vacant for over 30 days, a septic inspection would be required with FHA. So if it's a vacant property, foreclosure, for example, people moved out, then you would need it. So just to recap again, if it's not vacant, existing property, septic, termite, and well would be required if noted in the sales contract, or if the appraiser is requiring it, it is required.
but not the well.
New construction, it's gonna be part of those docs, so we're gonna be getting all of those things. It's gonna be required. Existing and new construction, if the subject property is on the septic and or well, the appraiser is gonna have to indicate whether it's feasible or not to hook up to public utilities. Have you ever heard of this coming up before? It can cause a cramp if you're not expecting it, you know, in the flow, in the process. Cost to connect is less than 3% of the sales price, and the only way to try to circumvent that for your seller is if you can prove that it's going to cause a financial hardship. So that might entail showing a breakdown of what the seller's proceeds were going to be, and let's say you had a seller that was already coming to the table with some funds or just breaking even, and you say, look, this seller just simply cannot pay this cost to hook up, in which case it may be able to be waived. But the general rule of thumb is if it's less than 3% of the sales price, it's considered feasible, and the seller would have to do that if those utilities have been made available. All right, so USDA loans. For existing properties, septic and termite, again, required if they're noted in the sales contract. Well inspection always required. It can be the total coliform inspection, which is the same as VA. So that it doesn't, you know, the one that's not as many things being tested. tests and pest inspections, and we're gonna talk about USDA. Has anybody had any experience with the USDA product at all? Okay, so this is one, I'm a big fan of this loan product. So anytime I talk with a buyer and they are not military, my first question is gonna be, do you have money for a down payment? You know, that's a pretty defining characteristic there, whether or not they can do it. And a lot of people in our market will say, well, I have this much set aside, but I would really love it if I didn't have to spend. Options of no money down or down payment assistance. Financially speaking, the no money down with USDA is a really nice loan product as far as how cost effective it is for the buyer. So this is one of 2 government loan programs that allows for 100% financing, the other one being VA. Currently USDA, their fees are a 1% upfront fee that is financed into the loan. And then they also have a monthly fee, which that's factored in. Just so you know, by comparison, VA does not have a monthly fee, okay? FHA does, and it's 0.85, anywhere from 0.80 to 0.85, depending on how much money the person puts down. So 0.35 by comparison is lower, right? So that monthly fee, so that keeps their payment lower. If they go with a USDA loan, then it would be with FHA, and they're doing 0 down because the mortgage insurance is less, a lower
Those
factor.
fees wrapped into the actual interest rate, or is it a
No.
separate line item in
Separate.
the escrow?
For VA, there is a household income limitation, so it's based off of your family size. So it doesn't matter how many people are on the loan, it matters what the total household income is. So you may just have one family member on the loan, but we have to account for, you know, the spouse's income, if they have an older parent that receives Social Security that lives with them, if they have a 19-year-old that lives with them and works part-time. Those are all people that we have to account for when we're coming up with this household income to make sure that they qualify. Immediate area, if you're a 1 to 4 member family, it's $86,850 a year total income. $86,850 a year. There are some deductions that you can get, small deductions that we can use for if someone in the home is disabled and they have disability expenses. If you have people under the 18 and under, you get deductions per child, and you can even get specific with child care expenses and deduct that as well to help someone be within that income limit. For a 5 to 8 member family, or 5 or more, we'll say, it's $114,650 per year. So if you're thinking about that, $86,850 for a family of 4 or fewer, $114,650 for 5 or more. You know, and again, thinking about our target market here, there's quite a few people that do meet that fall within there. So the other key thing is to know, well, are you guys okay with living outside the city limits? That's the other factor. It is, so this is insured by the Department of Agriculture. So it is called Rural Development. That's the name of the program. So by definition, most of Hope Mills is now not eligible because it's, you know, populated more heavily. They use census data and they review it every so often in order to determine what areas are okay and what aren't. There's a website that I've listed here that I highly recommend that you guys save to your favorites. And when you go to that website, you can go to single family eligibility and look for the specifically the property eligibility, right? And then you can type in an address and it will pull up on a map whether or not, it'll put a little pin and show you whether or not the property is eligible or not. And it also pulls up on that map where you can zoom in and zoom out the lines that mark where is eligible and where is not eligible. And you can zoom in and get down into the, you know, streets of a neighborhood and see where's okay and where is not okay.
And limit your searches to that.
Exactly, yeah. And that's really helpful to kind of get a feel for, okay, and you know, because there'll be little pockets of areas where everything around it is not okay, and then there's this little area that's okay. There's a spot that I just looked at, and everything around it is not, right? So, so that's a great website to keep on hand. You can also check the income limits when you're looking at that, because those income limits I gave you, those are good for Cumberland County, Hope County, and Harnett County. But I one time had a client that was buying, I think it was in Franklin County, and I was thinking in my head, oh, I think they make too much money. and then I was shocked at what the income limits were for that specific county where they wanted to buy. It was much higher, so they were able to use the program. So you can always check that to be sure. So that's something that you can check with your loan officer, you know, or if you're just wanting to kind of check in every now and then and see if they've changed the income limits.
What's
What
that
was that
website?
It's kind of a long website. I would just recommend, if you, do you have access to the slide? Cause, yeah, I tell you what.
Shall we send them out? Okay, I'll get your email and I can forward it to you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, I can send it to you. I would be up here just like spelling out all this stuff, blah, 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 blah. All right, so it's for primary residences only, vicinity, and use the USDA loan. It really is designed for people that don't own another home. The only exception to this is if someone is relocated because of their work and they're outside of a reasonable commuting distance. Then they would be able to have another property and still use the USDA loan. So that's good. With USDA, you can finance brand new manufactured homes. You know, finding manufactured home financing is not always easy to do. Existing you cannot do. So brand new you can do, which by definition is and never occupied before. The seller can contribute up to 6% in closing concessions. So USDA, the closing costs are included in total concessions. So concessions would be anything of value that is offered to the buyer. So let's say, for example, the seller is going to also provide a fence and it's gonna be $3,000. You would have to make sure that what the closing costs they've agreed to pay and that $3,000 allowance for the fence doesn't exceed 6%, otherwise 6%. There's a minimum credit score. So USDA says that if it's 620 to 639, that they'll manually underwrite the file. I do not know anywhere, I personally don't know anywhere that you can find someone that can do that 620 to 639 range. I've checked before, I've asked around. 640 is where all of us live as far as like what we can do, you know, that we have investors that will take USDA loans. So I say in general, you're probably looking at a 640 credit score minimum requirement, unless you can find somebody that can do that 620 to 639 range. So the way the loan works, once we've underwritten the file and it's approved, then it gets sent to USDA and they're gonna review certain documents and give their stamp of approval on it. Depending on how busy they are is gonna factor into what their turn time is. So sometimes it may be quick, it may be like 72 hours. And then other times, like recently, it could be 11 or 12 days. So that expectations are managed. So you can always check with the loan officer, hey, you know, how long should I give for this closing? I would say 45 days is probably good. 45 to 60 days is a good range to be in. But again, you can always check and see, you know, so that you're not having to push back your closing. Any questions about USDA? Good, okay. All right, so VA, you guys probably know quite a bit about the VA loan. Fantastic loan product. The VA funding fee is charged to buyers who are not exempt. So does anybody know how you would be exempt from the funding fee?
Disability.
Yes. If you have a VA disability rating of 30% or greater currently, or actually it might even be 10% or greater. I think it's 10%. So basically, and I think that's the lowest they even do, right? So basically, if you have any type of VA disability, then that funding fee is waived for that person. Otherwise, the first time you use your VA loan, it's 2.15% currently, and it's financed into the loan. Typically, it doesn't have to be. They could elect to pay it if they wanted to. Most people finance it in. It's 3.3% for any subsequent use, but that gets reduced if you do a down payment. So if you reduce it, if you do your down payment of 5% or more, it's going to be 1.5% funding fee. If you do 10% or more down payment, it's 1.25% that the funding fee gets reduced to. So if you have somebody that's doing a higher priced home, that 3.3% can be like a pretty big figure. So higher than potentially doing a down payment to reduce that cost. Again, primary residences only. But if you have turned your property into an investment property, which is perfectly fine once you have fulfilled that initial intent of occupying it, we say as a rule of thumb, 1 year at least, you know, unless you have good reason, like you get UPCS somewhere that makes sense that you'd have to leave your property. But if your property is turned into an investment property, you can refinance it and keep it as a VA loan and still do a streamlined refi if the rates are better and you have a reason to refi. You can keep your VA loan on that property. So just because it's now an investment does not mean that you wouldn't be able to maintain that VA loan and refinance. So that's good. That's something that VA allows. You guys, a lot of you know this, a veteran can purchase up to 4 units as long as they're gonna occupy one of the units. Keep an eye out for condos because we have to make sure that the condos are on the approved list for VA financing. And that's a you back and have earnest money and due diligence on the line and then find out they never could have used their VA loan on that condo anyway. So that's a question to run by the loan officer and make sure that it's on the VA list of approved condos. Seller contribution to buyer's closing cost is unlimited. So in this case with VA, the concession limit does not include closing costs. So closing costs, whatever you can get the seller agree to pay or whatever the seller agrees to pay is fine. There's no specific limit on that. But there is concessions outside of the closing costs. So again, that's anything of value. Like if you do an allowance for paint and carpet, it would need to be less than 4% of your sales price. So one thing I want to mention that you guys might come across, you know, there's a place on the contract where it talks about things that convey from the seller to the buyer. And a lot of times we'll have to go back and ask for those to be removed. So for example, let's say that a playset is listed on there. And again, it's not like we're going back and going like, is the playset here? We don't, you know, it can convey. It's just the issue that we run into with the contract is that then we're trying to figure out, well, how do we prove that this is within the 4% concession? How do I assign value to a 15-year-old playset, right? Or whatever that item may be, a house full of furniture, you know, like how, you know, it becomes difficult to be able to define what that value is for that item. So in general, if it's not appliances or something that's fixed to the property, it's better not to be on the contract that we're reviewing. Okay. All right. Yeah.
Alright, so you said 4% outside of closing costs.
Yes, correct.
So on the contract on page 9, it says agreement to pay buyer's expenses. Seller shall pay at settlement blank.
Mhm.
Is that considered a
Closing
portion
costs.
of those are closing costs?
Yes.
So in addition to that,
Right.
we can do an additional 4%.
Correct.
If closing costs in that spot, we got it up to 4% of the contract price. Can we still add on another?
Closing, so whatever, so you could have 6% in there. You could have, if you had a seller that was super generous, I mean, you know, hypothetically speaking, you could have any number in there at all to cover their closing costs, right? Obviously, only the cost that is actually present is gonna be covered, right? But that's specifically for closing costs. And then the 4% is completely outside of that, other concessions, not closing costs.
Okay. Thank you.
That's VA only, yep. Okay, so the standards for the residents for VA loans, any of these government loans, the condition of the home, they're pretty strict. They're looking for anything that could be potentially hazardous. So, you know, or that could cause a further detriment to the property. So when you're thinking about flaking paint, for example, right? If flaking paint is left unchecked, that's gonna lead to issues down the road that could even affect the structural integrity of the house. That's why things like that are dinged on the VA appraisal. Signs of fungus or mold, you know, they're gonna want you to pressure. Why is there the presence of mold? What's the problem? I've seen where cracks in sidewalks or cracks in the driveway, because it's a tripping hazard, that has to be fixed. You know, if they have any shingles, you know, that are popped up, they're probably gonna note things like that. So they're gonna be looking for anything that could cause a deterioration of the property or a hazardous issue for the veteran. One cool thing about VA is that, let's say you've had your appraisal done and the appraised value comes in higher than your sales price. You can, if you're having trouble negotiating the repairs with the seller, you can use the tactic of increasing the sales price by the exact cost of the repairs and then having the seller pay, right? So let's say your sales price is $150,000 originally, your home appraises for $155,000, and there are appraisal required repairs and the seller is not willing to do them. You get an estimate for the repairs that say the repairs are gonna be $2,000. So you, if you're representing the buyer, could go back to that seller and say, all right, the repairs are gonna be $2,000. We're willing to up the sales price to $152,000 if you'll do those repairs. So the seller's gonna net the same bottom line anyway. So they, it seems like a reasonable thing to do. So that's a negotiating tactic that you can use once the appraisal has been done, but it has to be done in that specific way. So technically the buyer can't finance the repairs, but that's kind of a way for it to work. Repairs. Make sense? Okay. One cool thing also about VA is that they are unique in how we're able to count rental income, and that's because of the transient nature of the job for a lot of people that are in the military. So we can offset a mortgage payment with a lease agreement and proof of that first month receipt and security deposit. So let's say someone is PCSing from Tennessee, they've got to come here, they had a primary residence there, able to utilize that even though they haven't had those tenants for a couple of years, even though it's not on their tax returns. I could take a percentage of what they receive and offset their mortgage payment to help them qualify for a house here. So that's something that VA allows. Another cool thing, so if you're active duty, let's say that you have someone that's active duty in the military and they're stationed in Fayetteville, but let's say they're from New York and they know that down the road they want to live in New York again. That veteran can buy that home in New York as long as their family is going to be occupying that property within 60 days of closing. So we can qualify them while they're here, stationed here in Fayetteville, and as long as we get a letter that says, yep, family's going to be living there, I plan to join them later, but we just don't want to miss out on this opportunity for whatever reason. The rates are low, I know I'm only going to be in the military X many more years, but I want to buy the home in New York, you can do that. But it has to be active duty, it can't be formerly military. If you're retired or out of the service, you would have to be working in the area where you're buying a primary residence, occupying it yourself. But they do allow that.
And it has to be immediate family?
Yes.
Spouse and children?
Spouse and children, correct. So VA, you can finance more than one property with your VA loan. I have seen people do as many as 3 before running out of their VA entitlement. So we calculate what's called the bonus entitlement that's left. So that's based off of how much entitlement they've used before, which we get by pulling their certificate of eligibility. And there's a minimum loan amount when you're using bonus entitlement. If they have a funding fee, that translates to about $140,000 on the sales price, because then when you add that 3.3% in, they end up being just a little bit over that $144 and $1. So that entitlement range is separate from their debt to income range, right? So those are 2 different things that we're accounting for as loan officers when we're saying to you, this is what this buyer can do, right? So we're checking the entitlement. Now, the thing about the entitlement, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't buy that second home that they want. It's only going to define how much can they finance before they'd have to do a down payment. So if they want to buy $300,000 and I tell them, look, I can get you up to $275,000 at 100%, but then we're going to have to calculate 25% of that difference for your down payment if you want to go up to $300,000. So they can do it. They're just going to have some kind of down payment factored in.
So they're doing away if the VA accepts it, it's been approved. Right. How's that going to affect this, and how's it going to affect the number of loans that
that is the because
Dan
what
will
they're
be able to tell us in a few.
Yeah, I mean, and we're all anxiously waiting to see, because that's the key thing that's hard to define with it, right? It's one thing to say, Okay, so VA loans aren't gonna be impacted by the conforming loan limits, right? Okay, but what happens, how do we calculate, entitlement? How do we calculate where's the maximum entitlement? And so that part has not been defined yet. VA hasn't issued guidance on that yet.
But there isn't supposed to be, right? Because when it was passed through Congress and Senate, they said there was gonna be a limit on.
But that doesn't necessarily mean as far as like how they're gonna.
They're also increasing the funding fee to pay for that.
Yeah, well, they've wanted to increase the funding fee. That has been something that's been talked about a lot over the years. And then there's political push. It's a political talking point. And so then next thing you know, the funding fee doesn't change. So
Even if it's already been passed in law, because it's supposed to be effective 2020, they're increasing.
yeah, that they're increasing it. I mean, again, until we actually see VA's
Okay.
guidance on practice. So we'll be looking for it soon, though. You think, right? All right. So any questions about VA? Okay. FHA, 3.5% down payment. It can be gifted in full or in part from a family member. I always make sure that my buyers know that FHA requires that we have the bank statement of that family member because people don't like giving their bank statements when they're not on a loan. So that's something that I make sure to discuss. FHA has an upfront fee that's financed in the loan, and then they have the monthly fee as well. But the great thing about FHA is it was designed to help people that don't necessarily have perfect credit to be able to purchase a property. So it's a great loan product. The interest rates currently have been really comparable to VA, nice and low rates. So it's great. There's no parameters on where you can buy. There are loan limits to FHA. Currently it's $314,827. So that's the maximum that can be financed using an FHA loan. FHA appraisals are pretty darn involved. Like a foreclosure where they're not going to turn these utilities on or something like that. They're going to require that all the utilities are on. Primary residences, just like VA, you can do a quadplex as long as you're going to occupy one of the units. So same there. It's the only government loan program that allows for a non-occupying co-borrower. So I've had it before where I had a borrower who was going to occupy the property and I wasn't able to count any income for them. And they had a parent that was willing to go on the loan. And so all of the qualifying income was coming from the parent, and we were able to do that. That was not a problem with an FHA loan. So that's something we look at, and
Does the VA do that? Sorry, that's it. Like
No.
if you get a cosigner or.
so VA only allows for it to be a spouse,
Okay.
or you can do a joint entitlement loan where both, if they're not married, both of them have to have their own VA entitlement.
Okay.
And they both have to be occupying the property. They can't be a non-occupying. Contribute up to 6% total concessions. So 6% like USDA. All right. Any questions about FHA? Good. We're gonna move into credit. All right, so I'm gonna turn this around real quick so you guys can see this, because I love, whenever I'm talking to people about credit, you can see that, but I love to compare it. I like to talk about it as a pie chart, okay? Because there are different components to credit. So the biggest percentage, okay, payment history, big shocker there, right? So how recently a payment was missed, and this means 30 days late, right? So if you're late on a payment, you have to pay a late fee, that does not hit your credit. But if it's over 30 days, that's a hit. They go 30, 60, 90 plus, right? So there's gonna be a greater hit if it's 60 day versus 30 day, and so on. And then the more recent that the late payment occurred, kind of makes sense, indicates that something's going on, and so it has bigger impact as well when it's more recent. So when we're trying to work on somebody's credit and we see that they have a couple of accounts that just recently went delinquent, I already know that I may be able to have some small gains, but the time is also going to probably be a big factor in building that credit up, because sometimes really, the solution involves distancing yourself from when those issues occurred so that you can show that you've, attained some stability in your financial picture. So payment history, amounts owed. So that is referring to your revolving credit, so the usage on those accounts. It's always great to have, ideally, you want to have credit available to you. So let's say I have 3 lines of credit available and they're all maxed out, okay? My score is gonna drop because that would indicate that maybe financially speaking, I'm in a bit of a bind right now and I'm having to utilize all my credit to make ends meet, right? So I'm not necessarily a great choice for someone to, for another investment or for another account to be opened up. Whereas if I have 3 accounts and I'm using just say 10% on each of them, my credit score is gonna have a huge swing. It's gonna go up a lot higher because that's showing that I understand how to use credit and that I have credit available to me as well. So one of the first things we look at when we're working on somebody's credit, trying to see if we can do a quick boost to help their scores, is do they have any credit cards that they might be able to pay down? Another key thing to know about that is it's not about how much you're paying down, it's about the percentage of use, right? So if you have a card that has a $300 limit and it's maxed out, and you have another card that has a $10,000 limit and it's maxed out, right? You're gonna get the same amount of points for paying down that $300 limit as you would the $10,000 limit. So start with the small ones and work your way up. Knock out more of the smaller balances before you go tackling the bigger ones, because you'll get more impact doing it that way. Length of credit history is huge. So when I see somebody and they apply and they have 2 accounts that have been open for 6 months, in my mind I'm like, oh, they've got baby credit, they've got brand new payment history. So they're not going to have as strong scores as someone that has established credit history and has accounts that have been open for 5-10 years. This is why when people pay off their car, for example, they're not expecting their score to go down. They're thinking, I just accomplished something and I paid my car off and I did what I was supposed to do. I should be rewarded for that. And it makes sense to me, that's logical, right? But the way the algorithm goes, you're actually losing an account that probably had, what are car loans, 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years sometimes? So you're losing an account that had age on it, and so it actually can drop your score kind of significantly. That's not to say don't pay off your car, but just to understand why that would happen. I've had that discussion many times with people. They're like, what the heck, why would my score drop? I just paid my car off. That's the reason. It's because you may have lost an account that had, or you would have lost an account that had some time on it.
So types of credit are also different, like a truck versus a credit card. How does that
Yes, so that's 10% of the pie there, right? So having different types of credit, so that would be like if you had student loans, mortgages, installment debt, revolving debt, all of those would be considered different types of credit. So if you only have, so sometimes I'll pull a credit for somebody and they have 2 cars, and that's it. 2 cars and maybe a student loan. And their score is just, fair. And they've never had a late payment. Everything's great, but they don't have any revolving credit. They're not showing that they understand how to utilize credit in a way where they have an amount extended to them. They're not going to overuse it. That is really crucial to go from, say, fair to good to excellent credit, is to have accounts. And the wonderful thing about revolving credit, because a lot of people are nervous about revolving credit. They're worried that they're going to get a credit card, they're going to run up the balance. There's a mindset of, if I can't pay cash for it, I'm not going to get it. A lot of people follow Dave Ramsey and they want to reduce debt. And that can go hand in hand, and you can still have available credit to you if you're using the credit as a tool. Right? So if I have a credit card, the idea is, let me use it for something small that I would have purchased anyway. I know I've got to get gas. I'm going to get around. I'm going to spend that money anyway. Why not put that tank of gas on my credit card and then pay it off? I'm killing 2 birds with 1 stone. I'm showing that I'm utilizing my credit. I'm not putting a lot on there. I would have had to buy this anyway, so I'm not spending any more money. You don't have to keep the balance. In fact, please pay the balance off. Don't pay any interest on it. So you're not paying any more than you would have originally.
You get cash back.
Yeah. And then new credit is also 10%. So likewise, like if you If you've opened up a new account, at first, it can drop your score a little bit. And then after you've had that account open for 90 days, 6 months, it's no longer going to have any kind of negative impact on your score. And if you have strong credit, this is going to be a nominal difference here. It's not going to be a huge impact. But basically what it is, you know, the bureaus are kind of looking at that like, oh, they open up a new account. Let's see how that goes. It's the same kind of thing with inquiries. And that's where that falls into that new credit category as well. Yes?
I have a question about delaying. So
Yeah.
what is if a 19-year-old wants to purchase a home, right? He has the money, but doesn't have the credit because he's only 19, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So how long are you looking for?
Well, so it depends on what that 19-year-old is able to do, because there are options. There's just not as many options. It's going to require a down payment probably, right? So they won't be able to do USDA because USDA likes to see at least 2 accounts that have a year history on there. So what we do is we demonstrate what we call alternate credit. And if we can't come up with that, then that person is gonna have to wait. So the alternate credit would be 12 months of something in that person's name. And that's usually with younger people like that, where we run into an issue, because I'll say, do you have a cell phone bill? I'm on my family cell phone plan. Do you have, can I get a verification of rent? No, I'm still living at home. Do you have anything that's in your name? Not yet, right? So that's where it's 3.5% down payment. But a lot of times when they have that young of credit, they may not have those alternate sources. We have to show something. So otherwise, I would say, depending on the loan type, you know, if they have no credit at all, they won't get a score until they've had an account open for 6 months. If you literally have nothing on your credit, you'd have to have your account open for 6 months before it will generate a score.
Real quick. Now, could that same 19 has the credit history, get them to do it for them, and they absorb the loan?
So what they could do, so like we talked about FHA, the non-occupying cosigner, that would be a great example of one that they could use in that situation, where if they have someone that's going to cosign and maybe not even live in the home with them.
Well, if, in the sense
Or-
of maybe not even cosign, like that
Okay.
person with good credit just takes on that whole loan, that 19-year-old gives them all the assets, like the physical money, to get it ready?
Well, in that case, you would have, the loan would be in the name of the person that is qualifying, right? What you're saying? And you're saying if the 19-year-old had the assets, could they be on the loan with them so that they're also on the deed?
I mean,
Or-
later on, they absorb that loan later.
subject to, basically?
I would imagine so, like, from my
Or like transfer it, you mean, after
Yeah.
once she's or he's developed already that history?
I don't know how they would be able to do that as far as the mortgage goes. I mean, as far as like having that person on the mortgage, you know, because you could look at them trying to qualify if it was an assumable mortgage, like later, if they were trying to assume that mortgage for someone else. FHA loans are assumable, VA loans are assumable. They could do something like that and go through the actual servicer that has that loan and qualify to assume it from them and
that
take over that loan.
Yeah, the original owner now is bounced off,
Yes,
and they're dealing with it.
yes, that's one way that they can do that, correct, yep.
That means any 18 or 19-year-old can just hack that person with good credit.
I mean, if that person's gonna occupy the home though, they have to, right? They have to occupy the home to be able to qualify to use that loan product, so. Okay, so anything we just talked about the pie chart, the different factors that are going into what we're looking at to build up positive credit.
I'm glad you said something about paying off the car.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking down the barrel of that right now within like the next month or two, and I'm like, I'm so happy that I'm paying off my car, but at the same time, I'm like, oh, my credit's going.
I just paid off mine 2 months ago, and then it got hit.
You saw it happen?
No,
Oh, your car got hit.
Yeah,
Oh,
I never had an accident.
no.
2 months after I paid off.
You're kidding.
No.
Oh man, the universe wants you to have a new car.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just to recap something for you guys, so what lowers credit scores? Okay, so a lot of times people think that an inquiry is just gonna devastate their credit score. So when you're talking about inquiries, it's a cumulative effect, okay? And one really great thing about shopping for a mortgage or shopping for a car is that for 30 days, you're gonna have a window where however much you're shopping, it's only gonna be one net inquiry. And that's to discourage, to encourage people to shop around for such a major thing, right? So if I'm shopping for a mortgage and I talk to mortgage company A, and then if I'm gonna get dinged for talking to mortgage company B, why in the world would I go around and shop rates, right? So for a 30-day window from the point that they first do that mortgage inquiry, you're free to check around and get your credit pulled and shop. That's the same with vehicles. A lot of times people think that because when they go to shop for a vehicle and you see this absurd number of inquiries that it's just devastated their credit, it will have only have been the impact of one inquiry. If it's within 30 days. So if you shopped for a car 2 months ago and then you shop for a mortgage now, or you shopped for a car 2 months ago and you didn't buy and now you're shopping again, obviously that's gonna be, right, it's gonna be another one, right? Collections and charge-offs. So sometimes paying a collection or a charge-off can actually lower your score, your FICO score. It's crazy, right? Like, why would that be? But it's true. Mortgage lenders, we're not particularly concerned with medical collections. Those are the least of our concerns. So anytime someone is thinking about paying off a collection or a charge-off, it's really good to talk to a loan officer that can, is this gonna help or hurt my score? Don't just go paying things off willy-nilly if they're already in collection. Generally speaking, if it's a credit card that went to collection, paying it off will help. And that's again having to do with that ratio of the revolving balance to high limit, because it would help you just like it would if it was an active account. So usually if it's a credit card collection, you can pay that off and feel comfortable knowing that it's gonna be a benefit. But I have seen it before where paying off collection A boosts the score 40 points. Paying off collection B. So consolidations can be great if they're paying off a lot of credit cards, because you're gonna get the benefit as long as those credit cards stay open. So you wanna keep the cards open, you wanna have the balance at 0. The fact that you've got a new debt and a new account is gonna negate some of that. Yeah, it's gonna negate some of that gain, but overall, the gain that you get from paying off the different credit cards should be greater than the offset of starting a new account and having a new debt. So, all right, so we talked about baby credit. If you don't have a lot of credit history, you're just not gonna have very strong credit, especially if you have, like the little credit history you have, maybe it's a bit problematic. You don't have something to offset that positive credit, and then high revolving balances. So the best practices is to monitor your credit. There's an app, Credit Karma, which is free, so people like to use it. One thing I just say, disclaimer, they use the Vantage score model. So the bureaus put out 4 different score models. So if you're looking at being able to say, hey, this is my credit score model, it's being used. For mortgages, we use the FICO, I think it's the FICO 2 or 3. So our score is gonna be different than what you have on your Credit Karma app, but the data is the same. So it's a great way to track trends. It's a great way to track, hey, when is my credit gonna update to reflect these things that I've done? I've paid off 2 credit cards. I wanna, tell my loan officer when my credit goes up. You can see on the app. If the app can show you those credit card balances are paid down, then I can see that, because that data came from the credit bureaus, came from the creditor bureaus to your monitor what's going on with your credit. There's also a website, annualcreditreport.com, where you can get access to all 3 bureaus for free. Once a year, it's open to you for 30 days. And that's a place where you can, if you need to dispute something, if you just want to see what's going on with your credit, you can also do it there for free. Annualcreditreport.com.
What's the difference range, would you say, between something you see on Credit Karma with Advantage versus what you guys use?
Yeah, I mean, so the difference comes in that the Vantage score model, there are differences in the algorithm that's used to come up with that score versus the FICO score, and even the range of points is a little different. So there's not like an exact difference, it depends, it's case by case, but on average, I would say that usually the FICO score is lower than the Vantage score, anywhere from, 15 to 30 points or more. Could be more. Yes.
Lines from.
So generally, we'll see differences in rate. It goes in like 20-point intervals, you know. So if you're at a 620, if you're able to get to a 640, there'll be an advantage. 660, 680, 700. So I mean, we sometimes see a difference if someone's over 800, right, which is getting close to like as high as you can get, versus like let's say someone had a 740 score and an 800. You know, that 800 might be just a little bit more advantageous. So it depends on the loan type as well. And sometimes what the credit score is will impact what's the best loan product for that person. So for example, if someone has a really high credit score, I'm going to be looking a lot more closely at conventional options for them versus FHA, because the mortgage insurance for them is probably going to be super duper low. Because that mortgage insurance company wants to know what's their credit score. Oh, their credit score is 800? Oh, they're probably going to pay this mortgage off. They're not going to charge as much.
Generally speaking, 540 is.
Well, so 540.
560.
Well, so 540, we would be getting into a credit plan scenario where we're figuring out what's going to be the most effective way to build that score up and what's the timeline for that.
Right.
So for us, we do have some investors that will do FHA and VA in that 580 to 620 range. But you know, when you're thinking about making an investment like a 30-year mortgage, the benefit of having your credit score higher is huge when it comes to that interest rate. If you're qualifying at 580 to 600 range, so if you don't have to buy right then, it would be a wonderful thing to do for you financially to improve the credit more, so that you have the advantage of having those, you know, better interest rate, not having to pay points to get a rate, and not pulling your hair out while you're trying to qualify. All right, guys. Any other questions? That's pretty much everything I wanted to cover for today.
VA and foreclosure.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a client right now who's looking at some foreclosures. She's VA, but I don't know.
With foreclosures and government loans is always, you know, what's the condition of the home, because you don't want that buyer to get under contract, and then there are appraisal required repairs, and the seller's like, we told you we're not doing any repairs, so what do you want to do? You know, so that's something to really talk through. If you think there's going to be any repairs that are required, talk through with the loan officer, talk through with the buyer, figure out if you have any kind of way to navigate that before they get under contract and have some kind of financial obligation where they're paying. But I mean, we do people use their VA loan to buy foreclosures all the time. It just needs to be in good shape. So.
Going back to the grace period for inquiries, does it matter the type of inquiry?
As far as the impact, or
like, let's say there's one for a mortgage. If you were to get a car, those are two different ones. Yeah. But does that still fall under the grace period for it only counting as one?
Not if you have two. So if you have so for mortgage, any other mortgage inquiry, you've got that 30-day window. Auto, you've got the and it's only those two types. So if you're trying to get credit cards opened, you're not going to get that same. It's going to be an individual hit for each credit card that you're applying for. And sometimes if you're with building your credit, if your credit isn't particularly strong and you're trying to build up some credit, a secure credit card is a great way to go. So secure credit card is like a prepaid card. So for them, it's easier for them to say yes because they've already got your money, you know, so they know, well, we got paid, so we'll give you this card. So the benefit for them is if the risk is mitigated. It might be like a $300 limit. You would want to have, say, $360 available for being able to pay for that limit, and then also they might have like an application fee or something like that.
That's how I started my credit.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's required if you have no credit too.
Yeah.
You know, you have to do a secure card, and that's how you're able to get something jump started. And then after that, things get a little easier once you pay on that phone.
I opened one up for my daughter, and I use it.
Yeah.
Kind of just get it personally.
Yeah. Any other questions? Good. All right. Thanks so much. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you.